I don't think I could have spoken about it before now, to be totally honest with you.
Why is that?
Because
Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Molly Sebrier and today is the first video in a 4-part series on why I left Paris. Now, before everyone gets all excited, this is not going to be a very dramatic video on everything that is wrong with Paris, things that are wrong with France, things I didn't like about Paris, things I didn't like about France or French people or anything like that. Those were none of the reasons why I left Paris, and it took me a long time to want to talk about this on the channel because why I left Paris just seems so final to me, and I make a living by helping Americans move from the United States to France. My husband is French. Thanks to having a French husband, half of my family is French, and we have plans to move back to France one day. We're not sure when. You'll get a little bit more information on that as the series goes on, but this very first video is all about the decision to leave Paris. So I hope you enjoy. As usual, if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with anyone who you think might enjoy it. So without further ado, let's jump into it.
Hi everybody, as you saw in today's intro from Molly, there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to start in episode 1 by just looking at the decision. So I'm going to start interview style, Molly. What led to this decision?
So a couple different things led to this decision. The first being it was post-COVID times when we came to said decision, and so that meant it had been 3 years, maybe 3.5 years that I hadn't gone home. Up until that point, I was always very intentional about going home at least once a year. Some years I went home twice. And then in 2019, I said to myself, I want to enjoy a Euro summer this year. And of course, when I tell this story, it's kind of funny because I always say, and hindsight is 2020, because the following year, obviously, the world shut down and travel wasn't as easy as before. So because I had spent so long away from home, I was dealing with a lot of angst, I would say, towards feeling different, towards feeling like an outsider, feeling like I was in this really weird in-between place where I didn't feel totally American anymore, but I didn't feel fully French either. And it was this place of deep, deep frustration for me. And I got to a point where I felt that the only way I would feel better was if Pierre, my husband, also felt those feelings.
It's funny to think that just visiting the United States once a year kept everything at bay.
Yeah.
And then remove that.
Able to reflect on it now, and it's interesting, I mentioned this in an interview that we did this morning. No matter how many years I live in France, no matter how many years I'm married to a French person, I did not grow up in France. I did not have my childhood in France in the same way that my husband didn't have his childhood in the United States. And that, for me, it just made me feel really different. And it made me feel, I didn't always have a problem or an issue being the stranger, being the foreigner, being the outsider. But I think it was so long in a foreign country without any of my repères from home. And it's a funny point that you bring up, that going back once a year was enough for me to kind of stay the course.
Recharge.
Yeah, and feel okay being the outsider. It got to a point where I couldn't do it anymore without feeling like I had this camaraderie with my husband who had gone through the same thing in a foreign country as well. That angst that I was feeling is what started the initial conversation.
Okay.
And
when was that?
Mid-2021, I would say. Yeah. And then...
Was it, honey, we have to talk?
No, because something I love about Pierre and my relationship, we're always very communicative, always very open and honest with each other. So it was my frustration was no secret. We would have different conversations about it, why I felt the way I did and how to move forward from those feelings. And it's so funny, trying to look back on all of this stuff. I don't know if we had this conversation where it was okay, we decided, now we're doing this, because there was a couple other things that influenced the decision as well. So the piece of me feeling like an outsider, then there was also the piece of when we got married, my husband, that was only the second time he'd ever seen my dad. And, only the third time he'd ever seen my mom. I am so close with my in-laws. So close. And I feel so fortunate because we get along really well.
Your French in-laws,
My French in-laws. So I lived with them for almost a year. We would see them at least once a week when we weren't living with them. And they were always just very welcoming. And I feel very close to them. And I'm so happy that I have that relationship with them because it also makes me feel closer to Pierre in a way. I wanted him to have the same opportunity to create something similar with my family. That was never going to happen unless we're living in America full-time, long-term. That was the other piece. And then the two other final pieces. The other one is my parents are a little bit older. They're a little bit on the older side, so they're aging, and that influenced me in that thinking that I might not have a lot of time left with them. And
you experienced a couple of deaths too.
I
while
did.
You were
I lost a grandmother who was like a parent to me, and that, I think, losing someone always puts a bit of a reality check into what is important to you, how you want your life to move forward. And I think probably when I lost my grandma was when we were like, okay, we're really doing this. And then the final piece is the fun piece. This has all been a little bit dark, but the fun piece in that my husband has never lived in a foreign country before. And it sounds so weird to call the United States a foreign country, but it is a foreign country for him as a French person. And so he's...
A little reverse tape. Instead of the American in Paris, we have the Frenchie in America.
Yes, exactly. So he really wanted to experience that. And as a married couple, as his wife, I could give him that gift, basically. And so all of those things snowballed together. And also too, I guess I'll add another reason is it felt like time to make a big change. And around the same time, many of our friends left Paris.
COVID changed the world.
Yes.
And changed our lives.
Yes. And so there was that too. So it felt like our chapter in Paris had kind of naturally come to a close. And in the similar vein of me deciding to become an au pair, because I felt like I wouldn't get that opportunity again, it felt like we might not have another opportunity to do it so easily, like before we have children. We didn't have an animal at the time. We were, subleasing our apartment. It was very easy to leave. And so it felt like the right time. It felt like the right time.
Decision was made in 2021, and then when would you go on to execute this?
In 2022.
2022. Yes. And that, dear watchers and listeners, is what we're going to talk about in our next episode. Now that you've come to the decision, how do you pull it off? And we'll be reflecting all throughout this series, how's Molly feeling now based on where we are today versus now. So now that we're looking back on, this episode, we're looking back on 2021, recording this in 2025, what are your reflections on this decision?
I don't think I could have spoken about it before now, to be totally honest with you.
Why is that?
Because as much as all of the reasons for making the decision, everything I just listed off, it was also very difficult for me to leave France because in a way I'm giving up everything I just spent the last almost 10 years scraping together. You
can't irrational feelings cannot be controlled, right? They just have to be managed or contextualized, and so I totally get that feeling.
It was on it, and I only very recently started describing it as such, but at the time it felt devastating to me, really. It's making me get kind of emotional thinking about my headspace at the time, because the life that I created in France, it felt as if, and it was, I brick by brick by brick by brick, and it was all of my own choices. Everything was coming just from Molly. It wasn't coming from my parents or my family or friends. And giving up something that I felt I worked so extremely hard for was very, very difficult, because at the time it felt like a failure in a way.
Really?
Yeah. And
I remember we talked about this at the time.
Yeah.
But I don't think you articulated it as a failure.
I didn't want to articulate it as such to anyone because it felt like a failure to me.
Because when you're articulating it as brick by brick, I don't see it as then I'm smashing the structure down. It's I'm leaving the structure for a while. The structure will be there if I want to come back. You don't suddenly lose your friends in France or lose your ability to live in France just because you're away for a while. So I think I probably would have pushed back at the time, but you were not in the space to talk about it.
No, and it was something so funny. A friend of my cousin's, kind of random, but a friend of my cousin's made plans to come visit my mom a couple weeks ago, and my mom was like, oh yeah, well, I'll hang out with Molly. And she's like, Molly? She lives in America now? And my mom's like, it's been 3 years. But it was something that I didn't really make an announcement about. Because I wasn't, when it was like happening, I wasn't super happy about it. And I wasn't excited about it. And it was more like, yeah, like I'm leaving, but don't worry, I'll be back. I'll be back. Like kind of like I was ashamed of leaving this life that A, I worked so hard to build, and B, that I had kind of like wiped my hands of living where I grew up. And in that way, it did feel like a failure. Again, now 3 years in, I know it's not a failure. I've only recently become like very content and okay with the decision after a lot of self-reflection, after a lot of honestly like talk therapy. At the time, it didn't, I knew it was the right thing to do, and I knew it was the right thing for myself and my family, like with Pierre, but it felt devastating at the time.
Yeah, and what you're describing to me sounds like duty. Duty isn't, who wants to go off to war? Who wants to defend a house from an intruder attack? You don't do it because you want to. You do it because you have to. And I think it's fascinating, and you should be commended for being able to work past that and say, and we've talked about this before, this is your own personality trait. You tend to put others first, and this might have been the biggest of all time in that way. But what I like about it is there's payoffs for you too. Yes. It's just that it wasn't obvious to you at the time, or even if it was obvious, it wasn't significant. You're like, oh yeah, great, I'm going to get this and I'm going to get that. However, it is devastating, especially if you, like Molly and myself, built lives in France that we loved and we were proud of. You have to construct your identity, and you have to construct a life in France by yourself as an adult with no other context. We didn't come with any friends. We didn't come with any significant others. We didn't even come for university originally. She had that school, but it was a study abroad semester. She wasn't in France to study specifically. So I think this goes back to a philosophy I often share, not just with travel, not just with what we do here at Tape, but you can always go back. Yeah. And so you're not blowing up the bridge behind you. And I feel you were confiding in me as much as you could, but you probably had to keep some things for yourself. So now I'm learning some things in this conversation as well.
And it was kind of like holding on to a lot of it because like I myself hadn't really processed it yet. And I was almost scared to even go there in my mind to process it because it just felt so devastating. But now that more time has passed and I have been processing everything, I've been allowing myself to process these things. And honestly, I've allowed myself to feel a little bit sad because like you said, there are benefits for me for being here, and it felt almost like, well, I can't be sad. Why would you be sad about going back to your parents, going back to wonderful best friends, going back to a beautiful
Brickley's ice cream,
Brickley's homemade ice cream? If there's any Rhode Island locals watching,
might have to do an entire episode just dedicated.
I grew up in a beautiful. We were just taking a walk this morning, and Stephen called it idyllic, and that's really what it is. And so it felt almost like. Duty is a great word to describe it, almost like how can you even like admit to feeling sad about that? And
I would say duty tied to selflessness, tied to sacrifice, tied to marriage, right? If you weren't married to Pierre, I don't see if the decision could be made in that same way. Maybe you would have just taken extended time in America for a period of time. So that's one of the beautiful things about marriage is that it asks you to do things, let's say in the trivial way, you go to concerts you don't really have any interest in going to. That's what happens for married people, I've observed as a non-married person myself. But in some ways it asks you to cross an ocean and to stay for an extended time in order to basically level up your whole relationship and level up your options for your future kids. Right. And we'll talk more about that later, but it takes a lot to do things that are not immediately rewarding in life in general, and particularly in this case.
Yes.
So since I'm the one talking this time, I'm going to do all the Molly stuff, which is I'm going to tell you to hit like, subscribe, share this with people who have had to make decisions about relocating or interested in coming back to the United States after having been in France for many years. This series is going to be talking about some of those, and further episodes from Molly in the future are going to be covering that in more depth. Maybe not necessarily a Brickley's ice cream episode, but we're not ruling it out. So stay tuned for the next episode, and until next time, à bientôt.
À bientôt.